They will cheat on you, not because you are not enough, but because you were too much. And that is the part nobody tells you. If you have ever been in a relationship with someone who ran cold, who disappeared emotionally, who made you feel like loving them was a full-time job with zero benefits, stay right here. Because what I am about to tell you is going to completely change the way you see what happened to you. And if you are watching this and thinking, wait, was my ex avoidant? Drop the word clarity in the comments right now. We are going to get into something really deep today. The avoidant will cheat on the woman who loves them the most, the woman who stayed, the woman who tried the hardest, the woman who bent herself into impossible shapes trying to make the relationship work. And by the end of this, you are going to understand exactly why. And more importantly, you are going to understand what it says about you, what it says about them, and what you need to do to never end up in that position again. Let us start from the very beginning. The avoidant personality is built on a foundation of fear. Not fear in the way most people think about it. Not the kind of fear that makes you shake or panic or run from danger. It is a much quieter, much more devastating kind of fear. It is the fear of needing someone, the fear of being truly seen, the fear of vulnerability, the fear that if someone gets close enough, really close enough, they will eventually discover something fundamentally unlovable about them and leave. So before you can leave them, they manage the distance. They create it. They engineer it. They become masters of emotional unavailability. And that is not something they decided to do one morning. That is something that was wired into them, usually very early in life, because closeness felt dangerous, because needing people led to disappointment, because showing emotion was either ignored or punished. That is the origin story. And once you understand the origin story, everything else starts to make a terrifying kind of sense. Now here's where it gets specific. Here's where it gets personal. Because the avoidant does not cheat on just anyone. They cheat on a very specific kind of woman. And if you have been cheated on by someone you suspected was emotionally unavailable, I need you to listen very carefully to what I am about to say. The avoidant cheats on the woman who is emotionally present. Think about that for a second. The woman who shows up fully. The woman who communicates openly. The woman who expresses her needs clearly and without shame. The woman who says, I feel disconnected from you. Can we talk about this? The woman who reaches out when something is wrong. The woman who does not play games because she genuinely believes relationships should be a safe place. That woman is a threat to the avoidant's entire emotional architecture. Because when you are emotionally present, when you are genuinely open, when you bring your full self into the relationship, you are forcing the avoidant to confront everything they have spent their entire life trying to avoid. You are asking them to meet you in a place they genuinely do not know how to reach. And instead of being honest about that, instead of saying, I do not know how to do this, I am scared, I need help, they do something else entirely. They pull away. They create distance. And sometimes they find someone who does not ask so much of them emotionally. Someone who keeps things light. Someone who does not trigger that unbearable feeling of being truly known. And they call that freedom. But it is not freedom. It is a prison they built themselves and painted to look like a vacation. The avoidant cheats on the woman who actually sees them. This one is hard to hear. You saw them. You saw past the walls, past the coldness, past the emotional unavailability. You saw something tender and real underneath all of that, and you loved that part of them. You fought for that part of them. You told them, I see you. I know who you really are. I am not going anywhere. And that terrified them more than anything. Because here is the painful paradox at the center of avoidant attachment. They desperately want to be loved. They are not emotionless robots. They feel deeply. But being truly loved, being truly seen, being truly known, that is also the most threatening thing in the world to them. Because if you see them and then leave, that is confirmation of the worst thing they have ever believed about themselves, that they are not worth staying for, so they preempt it. They leave first. Or they create enough distance that you cannot really see them anymore. Or they find someone else, someone who does not see them quite so clearly, and they disappear into that relationship where they can stay safely hidden. And you are left holding everything you saw in them, everything you believed about them, wondering what you did wrong, but you did not do anything wrong. You did the exact thing you were supposed to do. You loved someone the right way. And that is exactly what they could not handle. The avoidant cheats on the woman who is secure in herself. Now this might feel counterintuitive. You might be thinking, should not a secure woman be exactly what someone with avoidant attachment needs? And in theory, yes. In reality, it is far more complicated than that. A woman who is secure in herself does not chase. She does not beg. She does not make her entire world revolve around the avoidance mood. She has her own life, her own friends, her own goals, her own identity. She loves the avoidant, genuinely loves them, but she does not disappear into the relationship. She maintains herself. And for the avoidant, that is deeply activating in the worst way. See, the avoidant has a very specific relationship with the push and pull dynamic. When someone chases them, they pull back. When someone pulls back, they suddenly become interested again. It is almost mechanical. And when you are with a secure woman who does not chase, who does not perform desperation, who does not shrink herself to keep the peace, the avoidant does not know how to compute that. They cannot pull away as a strategy because you are not panicking. They cannot use your anxiety as a way to regulate their own emotions. They cannot feel that familiar rush of being needed or chased. So they start to feel, and this is the word I want you to hold on to, suffocated, even though nothing is actually suffocating them, even though you are giving them all the space in the world. The mere presence of a secure woman who knows her worth creates an unbearable internal pressure in the avoidant. And rather than sit with that pressure, rather than grow through it, they find an exit. Sometimes that exit is another person, someone who is anxiously attached, someone who chases, someone who gives them that familiar cycle of push and pull that their nervous system actually feels like. ND's comfortable. That comfort is not love. That is trauma repetition dressed up as chemistry. The avoidant cheats on the woman who communicates her needs. This is enormous. This is one of the most important things I want you to understand today. When you say to the avoidant, I need more quality time with you, I feel like we are drifting apart, I miss us, I want to talk about where this relationship is going, you are doing the healthy thing. You are being direct. You are being honest. You are treating the relationship like something worth tending to. The avoidant experiences that as pressure, as criticism, as an attack, not because it is any of those things, but because their nervous system is wired to interpret emotional demands as threats. This goes all the way back to childhood, to caregivers who were either dismissive or inconsistent, to environments where expressing needs either led to rejection or punishment. So the avoidant learned very early, very deeply, that having needs is dangerous, that needing people makes you vulnerable, that vulnerability leads to pain. So when you communicate your needs clearly and lovingly, they do not hear love, they hear threat, they do not feel drawn closer to you, they feel the urge to escape. And if that urge becomes strong enough, and if there is someone else in the picture who seems to demand nothing, who seems easy and uncomplicated and low maintenance, the avoidant will move toward that. Not because that person is better than you, but because that person has not yet triggered their attachment fears. The newness is a shield, and they mistake that shield for compatibility. Give it 6 months, the same patterns emerge. Because the avoidant brings themselves to every relationship, the geography changes, the person changes, the dynamics eventually do not. The avoidant cheats on the woman who is consistent. Consistency is one of the greatest gifts you can give a person. Showing up the same way day after day, being being trustworthy, being someone who does what they say they will do. For most people, consistency from a partner is the foundation of safety. It is what makes love feel real and not like a performance. For the avoidant, your consistency eventually starts to feel like monotony, not because you are boring, but because the avoidant's nervous system needs a certain level of emotional unpredictability to feel alive in a relationship. This is what they grew up with. Emotional unpredictability was the baseline. So when everything is stable, when everything is consistent, when love does not feel like a gamble, something in the avoidant switches off. They start to feel bored. They start to feel trapped. They start to idealize the unknown, the new, the exciting. And sometimes that idealization leads them to someone else. Someone who keeps them on their toes. Someone whose feelings are harder to read. Someone who recreates that early emotional environment that their nervous system, as UN, Ealthy as it is, actually finds familiar. And here is the most devastating part. They will often tell themselves a story to justify it. They will say, I just did not feel the spark anymore. They will say something was missing. They will say we grew apart. But none of those explanations get to the actual truth, which is that they were terrified of the intimacy your consistency was creating, and they ran from it. The avoidant cheats on the woman who invested deeply. The more you invested in the relationship, the more you cared, the more you planned, the more you gave, the more threatened the avoidant became. Not right away. In the beginning, your investment felt intoxicating. Someone finally really wants me. Someone really sees this relationship as something worth building. But over time, your investment started to feel like a mirror the avoidant could not look away from. Your investment highlighted their inability to invest equally. Your care highlighted their emotional unavailability. Your future planning highlighted their paralysis around commitment. And rather than rise to meet you, rather than do the work, they found someone who was not yet at that level. Someone who was still in the honeymoon phase of wanting them. Someone who had not yet asked for the depth you were asking for. And they started something new while you were still pouring everything into something that was already being abandoned from the inside. That is not your fault. That is not the result of you loving too much. That is the result of them being unable to receive love that requires them to show up fully. The avoidant cheats on the woman who believed in them. You believed in their potential. You saw who they could be. You stayed through the inconsistency because you knew there was something real underneath it. You held space for their growth. You were patient when they pulled away. You came back when they reached out. You told yourself that if you just loved them right, if you just were patient enough, if you just gave them enough time, they would become the partner you knew they were capable of being. And they felt that belief. They felt the weight of it, and that weight was unbearable to them. Because the avoidant is not in a place where they can live up to anyone's belief in them. They are still fighting the belief they have in themselves, which is almost always deeply negative. They do not believe they deserve the love you were giving them. Not consciously necessarily, but deep in their nervous system, there is a voice that says you are going to figure out I am not enough, and then you are going to leave. And that voice does not get quieter the longer you stay. It gets louder. So they manage it by leaving first, or by cheating, which is a way of sabotaging the relationship before it can devastate them. If they blow it up, they are in control of the ending. They do not have to wait for you to discover their inadequacy. They create a reason for you to leave that has nothing to do with their deepest fear. And then they get to be the villain of the story instead of the wounded, terrified person who did not know how to love you the way you deserved. Now I need to talk about something that does not get discussed enough when we talk about avoidant infidelity. And that is the role of deactivating strategies. The avoidant has a whole arsenal of mental moves they use to keep intimacy at arm's length. They focus on your flaws. They tell themselves you are not really right for them. They imagine what it would be like to be single. They think about other people. They compare you unfavorably to people from their past or people they barely know. These are not things they are always doing consciously. These are the mind's way of turning down the emotional volume of connection so it does not become overwhelming. But sometimes those deactivating strategies become dangerous. Sometimes the fantasy of someone else stops being a passing thought and starts feeling like a solution. And the avoidant follows that feeling, not because they thought it through, not because they made a clear-headed rational decision, but because their nervous system was screaming for distance and that other person offered it. And you are sitting there wondering what you did wrong, going over every conversation, every moment, every decision, wondering if you had been different, if you had done something differently, if you had not needed so much or had needed less, whether they would have stayed. They would not have stayed. Not in the way you needed them to, because the problem was never about you. The problem was about a nervous system that had been trained from childhood to see intimacy as danger. And no amount of love, no amount of patience, no amount of perfection on your part was going to override that wiring. Only they could do that work, and they chose not to. Let me be really clear about something here because I think this is important. Not every avoidant cheats. I want to make that absolutely clear. Avoidant attachment is a spectrum, and a person can have avoidant tendencies and still be committed, still be loyal, still work on themselves if they have enough awareness and enough willingness to do the uncomfortable internal work. The cheating that I am describing is not inevitable for every avoidant, but it is a pattern, a recognizable, documented, heartbreaking pattern. And it tends to happen with the specific kind of woman I have been describing throughout this entire video. The woman who is too good for them to handle. The woman who loves too well, the woman who shows up too fully, the woman whose presence makes their avoidance impossible to maintain without consequence. So what do you do with all of this? First, you stop blaming yourself. Whatever story you have been telling about how you were too much, too needy, too intense, too loving, I need you to examine that story very carefully. Because in most cases, that story was handed to you by someone who needed you to believe you were the problem so they did not have to face that they were. You were not too much. You were exactly the right amount. You were just with someone who could not hold that amount. Second, you understand that you cannot love someone into emotional availability. This is possibly the hardest lesson in all of this, because you are a person who believes in love. You believe in effort. You believe that if you love someone well enough and consistently enough, things can change. And in healthy relationships, love and effort do create change and growth. But in a relationship with a deeply avoidant person who has no self-awareness and no willingness to do the work, love does not create change. It creates pressure. And that pressure results in distance, in walls and exits. You cannot outlove someone's attachment wounds. They have to choose to heal. And that is a choice only they can make. Third, you get honest about what you are tolerating. Because here is a truth that is difficult to sit with. When we love someone with avoidant attachment, we often accept things we should not accept. We accept the emotional unavailability as something to work around. We accept the hot and cold behavior as something to manage. We accept the lack of vulnerability as something we need to earn. We make ourselves smaller, more flexible, more patient than any person should have to be. And in doing that, we teach the relationship what we will and will not tolerate. And what we teach the avoidant is that we will tolerate a lot, and they act accordingly. Fourth, you start doing your own attachment work, because here is the part nobody wants to hear. If you have a pattern of ending up in relationships with avoidant people, that is information about your own attachment system too. Not a judgment, information. Many people who are drawn to avoidant partners have their own anxious attachment patterns. The push and pull feels familiar, the unavail. Ability activates a chase. The hot and cold creates a cycle that the nervous system actually finds stimulating, even though it is painful. Understanding your own attachment style, understanding why you kept showing up for someone who kept pulling away, understanding what need was being met by staying in something that was not fully meeting your needs, that is the work. That is what breaks the pattern. And that work is not about blaming yourself. It is about liberating yourself. It is about understanding yourself so deeply that the next time you encounter someone like this, your nervous system recognizes it early. Not just your mind. Your body knows before your mind catches up. And when you have done this work, your body will tell you to walk away before you have invested years trying to fix something that was never yours to fix. Fifth, and finally, you allow yourself to grieve. Because losing a relationship with an avoidant is a specific kind of grief that is very hard to articulate. You are not just grieving the relationship. You are grieving the person you thought they were. You are grieving the relationship you thought you were building. You are grieving the future you believed was possible. You are grieving something that was real and something that was a fantasy at the same time. And that complexity makes the grief feel crazy, makes it feel like you cannot explain it to people who have not experienced it. But it is real. And it deserves to be honored. Grieve the love you gave. Grieve the time you spent. Grieve the version of them you fell in love with, because that version was real even if they could not sustain it. And then, when you are ready, pick up the pieces of yourself, the pieces you gave away, the pieces you dimmed down, the pieces you suppressed to make them more comfortable. Pick those pieces up and refuse to put them down again for anyone, because the right person for you is not going to be threatened by your emotional presence. They are not going to be suffocated by your consistency. They are not going to run from your needs. They are not going to cheat on your investment in them. The right person is going to meet you in all of it, not perfectly, not without their own wounds and their own growth edges, but they are going to try. They are going to choose you again and again. Not because love is a feeling that carries them automatically, but because they understand that love is also a decision. And you deserve someone who decides you every single day. You were never the problem. You were the opportunity they were too afraid to take. And that says nothing about your worth. It says everything about their limitations.